It's me, Sushreeya. Today I'll be talking about one of the greatest revolutions of all time, historians say, and that is the American Revolution. The 13 colonies were one of those big people that were able to defeat one of the greatest empires at that time, that is, the British. Today I'll be talking about some very crucial people that without them, they wouldn't have succeeded, the 13 colonies. So let's start. First, we should always start with General Washington. General Washington was a very strong man from Virginia, the South. People say that knew him that he had broad shoulders, long legs, strong arms, and he was almost impossible to beat in wrestling. So this would give you a clue why he decided to go join the Continental Army. He was incredibly strong, and many times he had escaped prisons and nets. General Washington quickly came up of the rank of a general. He appointed many trusted people, such as Marquis de Lafayette, Alexander Hamilton, and others such as Benedict Arnold. General Washington was also our first president of the United States, as many of you know, and that pretty much carried on his legacy. Next, as I mentioned earlier, we will be talking about Alexander Hamilton. Most people know Alexander Hamilton because he was a very strong man, and he was there in almost every single war. He was literally just out of his teens, only 19 when he joined the army. He also was very strong, and he was able to shoot a musket for a very far distance. He had very sharp eyes, the other generals would say. Next, I'll be talking about Deborah Sampson. Now, you'd probably be wondering, what would a woman do for the Continental Army? I'm sure many of you have heard of the soldier named Robert Shirtliff. Robert Shirtliff was actually Deborah Sampson, so I'll tell you her story. When she was just a small girl, her father had left the place, and after he had never returned. Then their family had landed in debt, and until her mom was able to pay all of the taxes and everything for the house, she worked on the fields countlessly. She carried stones and everything, and later she had said that that pretty much made her strong. And she wasn't afraid to shoot a musket. So that's why when the doctor had asked her why she became a soldier, she said that I wasn't afraid to shoot a musket and I could carry stones as heavy. So why not? Deborah Sampson was later known by her general as one of the most faithful citizens of the Continental Army. Next, I'll be talking about James Armistead. I'm sure many of you have heard of him, because he was a slave. Later, his own master decided to retire from the Continental Army, and he sent James to the British because he was a British officer, James's master. Then he landed into General Cornwallis's office. Had it not been for James, we would have never ever won the American Revolution. Because as most of you know, the Battle of Yorktown, or the Siege of Yorktown, was basically where the British had completely surrendered the entire war. After that, only a few minor battles had won, so most of the generals just went home. James fed these false information saying he was a spy for the British, appointed by Cornwallis himself. He fed the British a lot of false things, and he basically told them, let's make a fort at Yorktown. He gave a lot of great information to the Americans, and Rochambeau, which was a French general, at the aid of Washington. Speaking of the French, now I'll be talking about Marquis de Lafayette. That sounds like a weird name, and I'm sure not many of you have heard of him. But Lafayette was a very good friend of Washington. In the spare time, Washington and Lafayette would play cricket with the other generals. Because of Lafayette, we were basically able to completely surround the British at Yorktown, making sure they had no escape by the sea. Because of Lafayette, we were able to make many forts, and at the time, there was actually a fort named Fort Lafayette that was named after him. Lafayette basically told all these amazing plans. And he said that the main reason that he had joined the Americans was because after the 7 Years' War, you see, Great Britain, even though they won, had a totally big debt on them, so they started to tax the Americans. The French were so eager to go ahead and start to go against their former enemy, that is, the British. Now, I'll be talking about something very interesting. You probably would say, why would you call this guy a hero? He betrayed America. He is known as one of the best traitors of all time. But he played a very significant role in the American Revolution. Now, I think I just gave away the name. That was Benedict Arnold. Now, you'd probably be like, why in the world would you say Benedict Arnold was a hero? Well, I don't know if you know, but if you've known a lot of these battles, like the Siege of Yorktown, the Battle of Brooklyn, then you've probably heard of the Battle of Saratoga. The Battle of Saratoga was a very important battle, and that was also one of the turning points for the Americans. But it was also a turning point for Benedict Arnold. You see, after the Battle of Saratoga, he was wounded severely. And then after his family landed in debt, a bunch of his enemies in Congress had said that he had stolen money from the army. Then, 5 people that did not do a lot of things for the army were promoted above General Arnold. Afterwards, he decided that he would quit the army, and he never ever fought for the Americans again. But even though he helped the Americans a lot, not by winning the Battle of Saratoga, but afterwards, when the forts were abandoned, the British would come in the night and they would sneak by. Then what they would do is they would just take a bunch of cannons and weapons that they would need. But before they could get away, they had small militias, and those were the guys that were ready in 1 minute. You could call them Minutemen. That's what some historians call them, because they were ready in 1 minute. And he would lead them out, and then he would say, hey, the British are here, and basically they just want all their weapons back. Now I'll be talking about 2 significant people named John Hancock and Samuel Adams. We know Samuel Adams and John Adams because they were cousins. But Samuel Adams and John Hancock were actually the founders of a big society that you probably have heard of that's called the Sons of Liberty. They were the ones that formed all the boycotts and the Boston Tea Party and all those important parts that we know. They were one of the people that risked their lives, and they signed the Constitution that was sent to Great Britain. No one knows what even happened to that form of the Constitution. But if it were not for them, we wouldn't have got that idea that, hey, we should actually have something about liberty. There was taxation without representation because of them. And speaking of taxation without representation, I'm sure you have heard of the Loyalist, former Loyalist, now American Loyal, that was named Patrick Henry. He went to a lot of Congress meetings and he said taxation without representation. After he saw what the British were doing, he was the one that encouraged many people to go and actually speak out. Last but not least, I'd like to name Paul Revere. We all know Paul Revere because he was such an important man. Even though we lost the Battle of Lexington and Concord, if it were not for him, we would have lost so many more lives. He went out and he went to every single house, risking his own life. He was later captured and run away from the prison. And he told everyone the British were coming. Because he went through the sea and he went on land because he saw 2 lanterns lit and 1 lantern. That means they were coming on both sides. So that's what I wanted to share. If it were not for these people, think about where we would be today. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something new. Stay safe, guys. Bye.